The aroma of sautéed garlic filled my cozy kitchen, wrapping around me like a warm embrace. I stirred the bubbling marinara sauce, letting the steam rise and tickle my face, and for a moment, I was transported back to the carefree days of my youth. Back then, it was all about freedom, spontaneous road trips, late-night adventures, and laughter that echoed through the air. My heart ached a little at the thought. Adulthood had its own set of responsibilities that often overshadowed those joyful memories. Just as I was lost in my thoughts, the door swung open, and in strode my nephew Jake, his presence bringing a rush of chaotic energy that contrasted sharply with my structured evening. He was 22, with tousled hair and an easy smile that could light up any room. "Aunt Emma," he called out, his voice buoyant. "I hope you're not cooking anything too boring." I chuckled, wiping my hands on a dish towel. Boring? I'd like to think spaghetti and meatballs is a classic. Besides, you know how I feel about culinary adventures. They usually end in smoke alarms and takeout menus. Jake laughed, his laughter infectious, and I felt a smile spread across my face. Fair point. But I'm here to save you from your mundane cooking skills. Want me to help? Help? This isn't a rock concert, you know, I teased, though I was secretly grateful for the company. But if you insist, you can chop the vegetables. Just don't chop your fingers off, okay? He rolled his eyes dramatically, a playful smirk on his lips. I promise I'll keep my fingers intact, but you might want to keep the fire extinguisher handy just in case. As we worked side by side, I couldn't help but admire Jake's passion for music, the way he spoke about his dreams with a fervor that reminded me of myself at his age. "So, how's the music career treating you?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light while my heart weighed heavy with concern. He sighed, pausing to lean against the counter. "It's tough, Aunt Emma. I've been playing gigs at local bars, but it feels like I'm just spinning my wheels. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever make it." I turned to face him, my heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. "You have talent, Jake. You just need to keep pushing through the hard times. Remember, every great musician faced rejection before they found their breakthrough." He nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Yeah, I guess. It's just hard not to feel discouraged sometimes. I see my friends getting signed and I'm still here, chopping vegetables with my aunt." "Hey, don't downplay the importance of family," I said, giving him a playful nudge. "Besides, I make a mean spaghetti sauce. You'll thank me when you're famous and need a good home-cooked meal." He laughed again, the sound lifting the weight in the room. "I will. And when I make it big, I'll bring you on stage with me." Just then, my phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with a message from Mark, my husband. "Working late again?" I muttered to myself, feeling a familiar pang of neglect. I glanced at Jake, who was busy stirring the sauce, and the warmth of our earlier conversation felt like a distant memory. "Everything okay?" he asked, sensing my sudden change in mood. "Just Mark," I replied, forcing a smile. "He's working late again. It's become a routine." "Sounds like you need a break," Jake said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "You deserve to have some fun too, you know?" His words struck a chord within me. I had been so focused on being the dutiful wife, the supportive aunt, that I had neglected my own desires. "Maybe you're right," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes I feel like I'm just going through the motions. Jake stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. You're not just going through the motions. You're an amazing person, Emma. You deserve happiness. His sincerity caught me off guard, and I felt a rush of emotions bubbling to the surface. Thanks, Jake. That means a lot, I said, my voice trembling slightly. It was a moment of vulnerability, and I could feel the boundaries between us shifting in the warm glow of the kitchen lights. I took a breath, trying to steady myself, unaware of how this evening would change everything. The sun was barely peeking through my kitchen window when I found myself lost in thought, replaying the events of the previous night like a favorite song on repeat. Jake's laughter still echoed in my mind, a mix of mischief and sincerity that seemed to dance around the edges of my consciousness. I stirred the coffee, but my thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in the warmth of our conversations. What am I doing? I whispered to myself, clutching the mug as if it could anchor me to reality. I shook my head, trying to dispel the confusion that had settled in my chest. There was something exhilarating about Jake, something that jolted me from my monotonous routine. But he was my nephew, for heaven's sake. I could almost hear my mother's voice chiding me, Emma, keep your head on straight. Yet, there was a flicker of rebellion in me, a part that yearned to explore this uncharted territory. Meanwhile, Jake was wrestling with his own feelings. I could sense it during our conversations, the way he looked at me, those fleeting glances that lasted just a heartbeat too long. I wondered if he felt it too, the tension that hung in the air, thick and electric. Was I imagining it? Or was there something real behind his playful banter? Later that day, I decided to invite him over for a barbecue, hoping that a casual gathering would help clear the air. I texted him, my heart racing as I hit send. Hey, want to come over Saturday? I'm firing up the grill. I bit my lip, waiting for his response. Absolutely, can't wait, came Jake's reply, accompanied by a smiley face emoji. I couldn't help but smile back, even though a part of me felt a twinge of apprehension. What if things got too complicated? But I brushed the thought aside, determined to enjoy the day. As Saturday arrived, the sun blazed overhead, and I prepped the grill with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Jake arrived with a bag of chips and his usual carefree attitude. Hope you're ready to be blown away by my grilling skills, he joked, throwing an arm around my shoulder as we walked to the patio. Just don't burn my burgers, okay? I shot back, feigning seriousness while secretly relishing the closeness of his presence. We worked side by side, chopping veggies and marinating meat, our conversations flowing effortlessly. Every laugh, every playful shove felt like a thread weaving us closer together. Remember that time we tried to make pizza? Jake asked, his eyes sparkling with mischief. We ended up with a doughy disaster. I chuckled, the memory flooding back. And you insisted we could salvage it with extra cheese. That was a culinary crime. He leaned closer, his shoulder brushing against mine. What can I say? I'm a cheese enthusiast, but I think I could get used to this cooking thing if it means spending time with my favorite aunt. His words hung in the air, charged with an unspoken truth. I turned, our eyes locking for a brief moment that felt like a lifetime. Jake, you're not so bad yourself, I replied softly, my heart racing. flirtation felt like a game, but it was also terrifying. Was I crossing a line? I quickly focused on the task at hand, flipping burgers and avoiding his gaze, but the connection between us pulsed beneath the surface. Just then, the front door swung open, and Mark stepped in, his presence a sudden chill in the summer heat. "Hey, I'm home early," he called out, and I felt my heart drop. I turned, forcing a smile that felt strained. "Perfect timing. We were just about to eat," I said, trying to mask the tension that had suddenly thickened the air. Mark glanced at Jake, his expression unreadable. "Hey, Jake. Good to see you," he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp, as if he sensed the chemistry crackling between us. "Good to see you too, Mark," Jake replied, his voice steady, but his body tense. I could feel the shift in energy, the way Mark's presence cast a shadow over our light-hearted afternoon. As we sat down to eat, I couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was pivotal. Mark laughed and chatted, oblivious to the silent war raging inside me. I glanced at Jake, who was picking at his food, his usual spark dimmed. I felt a pang of regret, aware that whatever connection had been blooming between us was now veiled in uncertainty and tension. The kitchen was quieter than usual, the familiar hum of the refrigerator a constant reminder of the chaos outside. I stood at the sink, rinsing the last of the dishes from dinner, but my mind was far from the soap bubbles and warm water. Jake had left not long ago, and the air still felt thick with the tension that had lingered between us. I could almost feel the imprint of his presence in the space around me. "Emma," I whispered to myself, shaking my head as I wiped my hands on a dish towel. "What are you doing?" Just hours earlier, we had been laughing over the stove, the smell of grilled chicken mingling with the sweetness of sautéed vegetables. Every little brush of Jake's arm against mine sent jolts of excitement through me. I caught myself leaning in closer, hanging on his every word, and I could tell he felt it too. The way he looked at me, like I was the only person in the room, made my heart race. "Hey, you okay?" Jake had asked, leaning in just a bit too close while we were cleaning up. The air had shifted then, thick with something unspoken. I remember feeling my breath catch, the reality of him standing there, so near, making it hard to think straight. "Yeah, just tired," I had replied, pulling away. But the truth was that I was anything but tired. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Later that night, I found myself sprawled on the couch, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a jumble of confusion and desire. I needed to talk to someone who could help me make sense of all this. So I picked up my phone and called Sarah. "Hey girl, what's up?" she answered, her voice cheerful and bright. "Can we talk?" "It's kind of important," I said, my heart pounding. "Of course. Is it about Mark?" she asked, concern creeping into her tone. "No, it's about Jake," I admitted, feeling a wave of vulnerability wash over me. "Jake? As in your nephew?" she replied, her surprise evident. "What about him?" I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. "We've been hanging out a lot lately. He's been different. I don't know how to explain it, but there's this tension between us. Emma, you need to be careful. He's your nephew. There are boundaries you shouldn't cross," Sarah warned, her voice turning serious. "I know, but he makes me feel alive, Sarah. I haven't felt this way in so long, I confessed, tears pricking my eyes. I feel guilty, but I can't help it. Just think about what you're doing. You don't want to ruin your family or your marriage, she said softly, but her words felt like a cold splash of reality. After hanging up, I sat in silence, the weight of her warning sinking in. My loyalty to Mark felt heavy on my chest, but the pull towards Jake was undeniable. I couldn't shake the memory of how he leaned in, how his breath had mingled with mine, and the way my heart raced at the thought of him. The days passed, and I tried to keep my distance. Yet, every time Jake texted or called, I felt a magnetic pull. I was drawn to him like a moth to a flame, and each interaction only intensified the confusion swirling inside me. One evening, I found myself on the back porch, staring up at the stars, lost in thought. Then Jake appeared, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the moonlight. "Hey," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "Hey," I replied, my heart fluttering at the sight of him. We talked for hours, sharing stories, dreams, and laughter. But as the night wore on, the conversation turned serious. I could see something shifting in his eyes, a vulnerability that mirrored my own. "Emma," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he confessed, his gaze locked onto mine. My breath hitched, and the world around us faded away. The enormity of his words crashed over me, leaving me breathless. I felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. How could this be happening? I was his aunt, and yet I couldn't deny the truth of my own feelings that had been growing like an unstoppable force. "Jake, I stammered, my mind racing. But I didn't finish my sentence. Instead, I pulled away, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to think, to process this revelation. As I walked back inside, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. My marriage, my family, and the undeniable connection I shared with Jake. I was standing at a precipice, and the choice ahead loomed large, dark, and terrifying. I stood in the kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator, my only companion as I stared at my phone, Jake's messages lighting up the screen. Each one was a heartfelt declaration, pulling at the frayed edges of my resolve. "You can't ignore this, Emma," he had written last night. "Life's too short for regrets." I felt my heart quicken at his words, a mixture of guilt and desire swirling within me. I knew I was playing with fire, yet the allure was intoxicating. I turned away from the phone, trying to focus on dinner, though my mind was a tempest. The pots clattered as I organized the ingredients, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Jake. Just a few weeks ago, everything was so simple. Now, my life felt like a tangled web of emotions, and I was trapped at the center, suffocating under the weight of my choices. I was an aunt, a wife, and yet here I was, caught in a longing that felt both thrilling and perilous. "Emma?" Mark's voice broke through my reverie, and I jolted slightly, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "What's for dinner?" He walked into the kitchen, his presence grounding yet disquieting. Mark was oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. He had his own world, one where my struggles didn't exist. "Just some pasta," I replied, forcing a smile. "How was work?" I busied myself at the stove, stirring the sauce. The aroma filled the room, but it couldn't mask the tension simmering beneath the surface. Same old, he said, shrugging. You look a bit distracted. Everything okay? His brow furrowed slightly, an expression I had seen countless times before. But today, it felt like an intrusion. Yeah, just a lot on my mind, I said, avoiding his gaze. I couldn't tell him about Jake, about the way his laughter filled the empty spaces in my heart. You know how it is. Work, life. I chuckled lightly, but it felt hollow. I could sense Mark's eyes on me, scrutinizing. You sure? You've been a bit off lately. There was a hint of concern in his voice, but I could also detect a trace of suspicion. I swallowed hard, the knot in my stomach tightening. I'm fine, really, I insisted, trying to sound more convincing than I felt. Just a bit tired, I guess. I looked out the window, the sun starting to set, casting a warm glow on the neighborhood. I thought of Jake, how he would have made a joke about the romantic view if he were here. After dinner, as Mark settled into the couch with a book, I snuck away to my phone again. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over Jake's name. I knew I shouldn't. I was trying to distance myself, to draw a line. But when I finally opened the chat, my heart raced as I read his last message again. I miss you. I bit my lip, contemplating. Just then, the doorbell rang, and I jumped, my heart pounding. I expected it to be a neighbor or a delivery person, but when I opened the door, there stood Jake, his guitar slung over his back and a lopsided smile on his face. Hey, I thought I'd surprise you, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The warmth of his presence flooded the room, and I felt my defenses crumbling. Jake, I started, but words escaped me as he moved closer, the air thick with unspoken tension. Emma, we need to talk, he said, his voice low and earnest. I can't keep pretending that what's between us isn't real. My breath caught in my throat. Jake, we shouldn't. Why not? Life is too short to hide our feelings. You know it, I know it. His eyes sparkled with determination, and I could feel my resolve beginning to waver. Mark, I stammered, feeling the weight of my marriage like a stone in my chest. Mark doesn't have to know, Jake replied, stepping closer still. Just give me a chance to show you what we could be. And in that moment, with the world around us fading away, I felt the magnetic pull toward him. My heart raced as he reached out, brushing a stray hair behind my ear. The room felt charged with electricity, and I could no longer deny the longing that had been building between us. Emma, he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. The way he said my name sent shivers down my spine, igniting a fire within me that I had tried so hard to extinguish. The kitchen, once a place of mundane routines, transformed into a sanctuary of possibilities. I leaned in, caught in a whirlwind of desire and fear, and before I could think twice, I found myself kissing him. The taste of him was intoxicating, and for a fleeting moment, everything felt right. But as reality crashed back in, panic set in. I pulled away, wide-eyed and breathless. What did we just do? I gasped, the enormity of our actions crashing down on me like a tidal wave. Emma, wait. Jake looked confused, his eyes searching mine for answers that I didn't have. I can't do this, I stammered, backing away, my heart racing with a mix of exhilaration and dread. I could feel the weight of my choices pressing down on me, and I knew that whatever had just happened would change everything. I stood in the kitchen, a whirlwind of emotions crashing over me like a storm. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I faced Jake, who looked at me with a mix of confusion and heartbreak. The kitchen, once a sanctuary filled with laughter and warmth, now felt like a prison of my own making. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice, but it trembled as I spoke. Jake, we can't see each other anymore. His eyes widened, the disbelief etched on his face. Emma, what are you talking about? Just because we kissed. I cut him off, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. No, it's not just the kiss. It's everything. This. I gestured between us, feeling the distance grow. It's wrong. You're my nephew, and I can't let this happen. I can't let it go any further. He took a step back, his expression a mixture of shock and pain. So, that's it? Just like that, you're going to throw everything away? I thought we had something real. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. We do, but it's not right. I have Mark to think about. I can't betray him like this, even if things aren't perfect between us. Jake's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. You think I want to hurt you? I just wanted to be with you, Emma. I thought you wanted that too. I did. The admission slipped out before I could stop it, and I felt a sharp pang of regret. But I can't. I have to be responsible. He turned away, his back to me, as he ran a hand through his hair in frustration. You're just going to pretend this never happened? I wish I could, I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. But I can't. I need to figure out what to do. Before I could finish, my phone buzzed on the counter, and I glanced at the screen, seeing Mark's name flash. My heart sank further. I knew this moment would come. I had to face him, and the truth was looming over me like a dark cloud. When I finally confronted Mark, the tension in the air was palpable. Emma, I know something's been off lately, he began, his voice steady but laced with an edge of accusation. I saw you with Jake. You've been spending a lot of time together. I felt my stomach twist, and I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words got stuck. Instead, I blurted out, I kissed him, okay? I kissed Jake. The confession hung in the air like a heavy weight, and Mark's expression morphed from confusion to anger. You kissed him? My God, Emma, what were you thinking? He took a step forward, his frustration palpable. You know he's family. This is insane. Don't you dare act like you're the perfect husband, I shot back, my pulse racing. You've been distant and preoccupied. I felt alone, and Jake was there for me. I never meant for this to happen, but it did. Mark's eyes narrowed, and I could see the gears turning in his mind. So, you think it's okay to just betray our marriage because you felt neglected? This isn't just some silly crush, Emma. You're playing with fire. I know, I cried, my voice breaking. But you've been so wrapped up in your own world that I didn't know where else to turn. I'm not excusing what I did, but you have to understand. Understand what? He interrupted, his voice rising. That you've thrown everything away? We've built a life together, And you're willing to toss it aside for a moment of weakness? I shook my head, tears spilling down my cheeks. It wasn't just a moment, Mark. It meant something to me. But I can't just ignore the consequences. I can't keep doing this to you, to us. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the distance between us grow, a chasm filled with hurt and betrayal. I turned away, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere. I need to clear my head, I murmured, grabbing my jacket and heading for the door. As I stepped out into the cool night air, my heart raced. I found myself wandering to a local bar, driven by a need to immerse myself in music and forget the chaos of my life. The low hum of conversation and laughter greeted me as I entered, but my mind was a swirl of thoughts, of Jake, of Mark, of the mess I had created. Then I spotted him on stage. Jake stood under the dim lights, guitar in hand, his fingers moving effortlessly over the strings. The passion in his performance ignited something deep within me. I felt my heart leap as he sang, pouring his emotions into the melody, and I realized that I couldn't just let him go. As the last notes of his song faded into the night, I knew I had to confront my feelings, to embrace the truth of what was happening between us. The sight of him, so alive and enchanting, reminded me of the connection we shared, a connection I couldn't easily sever. My heart raced, not just from the music, but from a longing I couldn't deny any longer. The night air was cool against my skin as I stepped outside the bar, the vibrant sounds of Jake's music fading behind me. My heart raced with a mixture of adrenaline and desire as I spotted him waiting near his car, his face illuminated by the streetlights. When our eyes met, it was as if the world around us disappeared. It had been too long since I felt this alive, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. "Emma," he said, a gentle smile spreading across his face. He stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and wrapped his arms around me. I melted against him, feeling the warmth of his body seep into my chilly skin. "You came." "I had to," I whispered, burying my face in his shoulder. "I couldn't stay away." He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine. "Are you sure about this? About us?" I nodded, though uncertainty flickered in the back of my mind. My heart was screaming one thing, but my mind was a battlefield of doubts. "Yes, I want this. I want you." Jake leaned in, and our lips met in a desperate kiss, filled with all the passion that had been building between us. It was intoxicating, and for a moment, the chaos of my life faded away. But just as I began to lose myself in him, the sound of footsteps echoed behind us. I pulled away, dread pooling in my stomach as I turned to see Mark approaching, his expression a mix of anger and betrayal. "Emma!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the night. "What the hell is going on here?" I stepped between them instinctively, my heart pounding. "Mark, wait." "Stay out of this, Jake." Mark spat, his gaze hardening. "You think you can just come in here and take my wife?" I could feel the tension crackling in the air, each word igniting a fire that threatened to consume us. "This isn't what it looks like," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "Then what is it?" Mark challenged, eyes darting between us. "You're out here making out with him while I'm working late, and you expect me to believe it's innocent?" "Mark, please." My heart raced. I needed to see him. "You haven't been around, and Don't you dare turn this around on me, he interrupted, his voice rising. You think I don't know what's been happening? I hired a PI, Emma. I know about your little meetings. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, stunned, as the reality of it all sank in. You had me followed? I could barely manage to say, disappointment pooling in my throat. Damn right I did, Mark shot back. You think I'm going to sit back and let you ruin our marriage? You're the one who's been sneaking around. Jake stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. You're the one who needs to take a long look in the mirror, Mark. Emma deserves better than this. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, torn between the two men I cared about. Stop it, both of you, I shouted, desperation clawing at my insides. This isn't helping. Mark's expression shifted, and for the first time, I saw vulnerability break through his anger. I've made mistakes too, Emma. I didn't want you to find out this way. What mistakes? I pressed, the air thick with tension. What are you talking about? He hesitated, and in that moment, I knew he had something to say that could change everything. I've been seeing someone, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. It's been going on for months. The ground felt like it was shifting beneath me. I was reeling, grasping at the pieces of this shattered reality. You were cheating on me? I didn't want to hurt you, he said, anguish etched across his face. But you've been so distant. I thought I could fix it by finding comfort elsewhere. Stunned silence enveloped us. I turned to Jake, who looked equally affected by the revelation. My mind raced, processing the weight of Mark's confession. And then, in a moment of impulsive clarity, Jake took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Emma, let's just leave this behind, he said urgently. We can start fresh, just the two of us. We can run away together. The suggestion hit me with the force of a tidal wave. My heart surged with the thrill of possibility, but it felt like a reckless leap into the unknown. I glanced back at Mark, whose face was a mixture of pain and regret, and then back to Jake, whose eyes were filled with hope. I don't know, I stammered, my heart racing at the crossroads before me. The weight of my choices pressed down on me, and as I stood there, torn and trembling, I felt the terrifying thrill of uncertainty wash over me.